I'm Whitney Dangerfield, the publications director here at the Journalism Institute. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Thank you guys for being here. Brian Braiker is right here. He is the president and editorial director of Brooklyn Magazine. He's worked at Newsweek, ABC News, Adweek, The Guardian, and Parenting Magazine. He is the executive editor of Digiday and then editor-in-chief of Ad Age. Sukjong Hong is an editor at Curb, New York Magazine's city site. She previously worked at the Architect's newspaper and the New Republic. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Rest of World, Long Reads, Al Jazeera America, and Gothamist, among other publications. And Max Rivlin-Nadler is a co-publisher of Hellgate. He's a reporter for The Gothamist, The New York Times, Village Voice, NPR, among other publications. So thank you all for being here. So my first question is I have a lot of students are ask about editing, like how do you get started when there isn't really like an editing 101 class or how to be an editor, and then you come out with a degree on it. So I wanted to ask you each, how it was, can you tell us about how you first started editing? And I can call on you, or you can just start going.
I'll go.
Go for it.
I think journalism is a weird career in that, like, the better you get at it, the further away you move from the thing that you got good at in the first place. So if you're a good writer or reporter, it's a very different skill set from being a good editor. The higher up the ranks you go, the further away you get from that sort of core competency you may have developed. I started editing because there were not a lot of. I was at Newsweek I was at Newsweek.com when it was a vestige of the CD-ROM department, and they had just started the website as sort of a backwater. It was very much an after. This is like 4 Newsweeks ago when Newsweek was. Trust me, it used to be relevant. May not seem like it these days. Anyway, I was there. We had a lot of writers on staff that would just kick stuff over the website. My editor would say, like, why don't you take a crack at this? I had no idea what I was doing. The first person I had to edit was Jonathan Alter, who's a nationally syndicated political columnist that I had no business editing whatsoever. I think I suggested one word change, and he's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then I felt very, very proud of myself for that. So the first editing job, no training whatsoever. And you just sort of, hopefully, the more you do it, the more you pick up. And the more you fuck up, if I may, the more you learn.
So I also have to echo that you just kind of get sometimes put into editing jobs. So what happened with me was, I think after writing for a while and freelancing for a while, a job opened up at Architect's newspaper. And it's a very kind of specialized trade paper that focuses on architecture and the built environment. And the qualification I had primarily was actually that I'd studied architecture and urban planning. And so that base of knowledge was what they valued even more than editing. And so I knew that at least I would know what they were writing about. And I also do enjoy editing. I had edited, but primarily academically, like, grad papers, research papers. And so it began really as a fast-paced web editor job. So it was a lot of posts every single day, just making sure the copy was very clean, that it wasn't bogged down by jargon, and that people would understand it who were really on the go, like architects. And so that's how I began. And it wasn't really there was an edit test. There was, all the stuff that kind of people do to make sure that you have some idea of what you're doing, but there was no training per se for it.
Yeah, I'd say of these folks, I'm still like the most reporting out in the field. I know you guys try to do it when you can, but like in my current role, I'm going back and forth a lot between reporting and then pitching in what need be, and I think that has to do a lot with being coming up in a lot of like digital first publications where these lines blur a good amount. Maybe you don't have a ton of staff. So even from the first places I was at, it was kind of like, okay, can you go give a read to this, either a copy edit or an actual like go in and do some surgery, even as I was like juggling all these other things. So I'm still kind of straddling the line here, and I am not the best nuts and bolts editor. Just never had the eye for it, but in terms of like actually like coming up with ideas or talking through stories, that's really, I'm super interested in that, and have gotten to do that through Hellgate a bunch. Yeah.
I'm still a terrible copy editor.
Yeah,
I'm the worst.
Well, they're different skills, and it used to be there was a like substantive editors, and then or like story editors and then copy editors, but that's sort of gone away. Yeah. So I wanted to know. I'm going to sit up forward because when I sit back, I look like I'm in third grade. So I'd love to know about like what a typical week is like for you. So what are all the things that you're juggling? You know, newsletters, podcasts, all of the writing, just to give us a sense of what your job is like day to day. And you started, so Max, would you start?
Yeah, I mean, again, so Hellgate, if you're not familiar, is we just started a year ago. It is very small, but it is a worker-owned publication where we just juggle a ton of roles. So it could be I'm editing today and I'm waiting for a co-owner of mine to file, or I'm running off to a press conference, or I'm taking a story that I did and I'm kind of taking that script and turning it into a podcast episode, which is something I did last week. Is like I took 2 long stories that I wrote and I melded them together for, you know, this kind of half-hour, very like detail-oriented explainer of like New York City's electrical grid. And then in terms of like the most editorially focused is a few times a week we will have these pitch meetings because we have pitches coming in, and we also want to talk to each other about the stories that we have. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, but like our bar is pretty high on what is publishable, not only because we're dealing with like a finite amount of resources right now, and we like to pay freelancers pretty well, or at least what we would like to be paid. So we're judicious, but we try not to shut down people when they pitch. It's kind of like, can you explain this better? Or like, interesting, but this is the reason why it's not going to work. And that takes like, you know, 4 to 5 hours a week of just like going through pitches just to find like 1 or 2 that actually work. And, you know, we're making an evaluation of whether it's actually a pitch that's like fits our publication, but also whether the freelancer can deliver it and like actually get it in a form to us that won't, because we're doing all these other things, eat up all of our time. So that's like another consideration, because we could have the best pitch, but then we're just going through somebody's clips and we're like, I don't think they have it in them. So we'll give them a phone call and we'll talk. And that's another hour of like spent on editing that's not actually like paragraph goes here or like rearrange this. You're not actually editing. So a lot goes in like behind the scenes to even get to the like working on a draft point.
Thank you.
So at Curbed, we're a small team within a larger publication, New York Magazine, and generally what we're trying to do as well is see what we really need to get up that day that is like a story that we should have a position on or a commentary on. We do have a pitch document that all the writers are responsible for pitching into every single day. We have a 10 a.m. A pitch meeting where all the editors get together and evaluate them, and we also pitch. So it's like this live meeting where it's like we try in 30 minutes to assign all the stories that need to go up that day. And then for the rest of the morning, I'm usually trying to edit something very quickly that does need to go up that day or that needs to go up the next day. And then generally once every 2 weeks, there's also a big ideas, like a features pitch meeting. So the writers all pitch, you know, stories that might take months or that might take at least a month that are more than 1,000 words, and then we evaluate those about once every 2 weeks. And then generally I'm looking at all the emails as much as I can during the day, and if anything seems to rise or that I feel this is debatable, then I ask the other editors to weigh in. So that's some of the kind of editing and assigning thinking, but then also I'm also just talking to writers about their jobs and if they're happy in their jobs, and I'm also talking to new writers that I think are promising, and I'm setting up phone calls, and then I'm also working on the freelance like manuscripts that I have, usually very piecemeal. Very sorry to all the freelancers in between all of that. And I'm also just talking to, you know, there at New York Magazine, there's like an audience team, there's like all these different types of teams that are scheduling the main homepage. And so I'm also answering questions about how we're scheduling all the stories and whether our homepage will be filled with stories, whether we need to fill it more, we need to assign more. And and I'm also just talking to the direct reports, the writers that I do manage. And because Curbed is city news, real estate news, and design news, it's kind of like my brain has to shift quite a bit, trying to think, we have so many city stories today, but we really should be covering this design development that's like smaller but still kind of critical. Or there's this major real estate news that we have to cover, so we have to pull someone off something that they're doing and get them to actually blog something. So there's a lot of who's blogging, who's available to blog, who's writing something, and we should protect their time. So we're doing, I'm generally just constantly making decisions, which it's a little bit of decision fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah, you describing that, I can like visualize the one tab from the freelancer of the non-timely story that's just like taunting you all day, and you're like, I'm definitely getting there. I'm definitely, yes, for sure. And then you're like, first thing tomorrow, I'm getting you these edits.
Yeah.
This happens, and please be kind to your editors if you have a non-deadline story. It's like evergreen is dangerous.
Yeah.
Can I ask a couple questions? So in this pitch doc that you have, is that pitches from freelancers that you think are promising that you're putting in there, or are they just from your staff writers? Or
The daily is from our staff writers, and we do have one for freelancers. So we kind of try to document and mark the ones that we think are interesting that everyone should read. But we consider that more on a weekly basis rather than daily.
And then my other question was how much, so you said a little bit about interacting with the other vertical editors. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Are they saying, oh, are you on this thing? Or are you worrying you're replicating things?
Exactly. So we do overlap a little bit with Intelligencer, with The Cut, with Vulture sometimes, like if there's Succession Real Estate, or everyone wants to know more about the Rat Czar, or if something's happening around like a retail store opening that's a little bit designed very interestingly, then I do try to talk a lot more with the editors at the other verticals to make sure we're covering it, that we're not overlapping, or to see if our coverage is unique. Yeah.
Thank you. Brian.
So like Hellgate, we're sort of worker-owned publication. So on the edit side, the entire staff is me, and we are entirely freelance run editorially. My week is we have 2 newsletters, one that goes out on Tuesdays, one that goes out on Fridays, and we're probably going to add a third. And that sort of like sucks up the stories of the week. So my week is oriented around making sure we have stories to fill the newsletter. I have a podcast that I do on a weekly basis, try not to miss a week. And that requires several hours of prep and then the recording, and then I have producers who edit that down. Yes, being freelance driven, everything is sort of. I have a stable of freelancers who are sort of de facto staffers, and that they contribute. I can rely on them. I know, like, oh, there's a story about X. I can tap this guy, or this woman can handle this. And then it's longer term projects, the deathly evergreen thing that sits open on my tab forever. And it's just, we're really lean. And so it's boils down to what I physically, just myself have the bandwidth to process, to edit, to read, to respond to, and to stay on top of. So we have to really pick our battles. Like you were saying, we have to, if we're going to do a story, it has to be differentiated. We can't just pile onto the news dog pile, because that doesn't add anything. And so maybe we won't cover the Rat Czar because we don't have a lane there as much as I would like to. But if I got a really smart pitch, then I would take it, and it would have to be turned around quickly and all of that. So it's reading, it's going through my emails, which are a lot, and then same thing, working with freelancers, why this works, why this doesn't work. I don't answer every email, it's because I can't. It's nothing personal. So that's my week.
So we've all talked about the Rat Czar now. So I do want to talk about, because you each of your publications cover the city in some way, and you'd cover, and I think that you'd cover like the Rat Czar in very different ways. So I do want to, like, could you go down the line and be like, what would a typical story on the Rat Czar be for you? And maybe it's nothing. But that's good to know too. And then another one, I was like, I'll throw out 2 topics, so the rats are, but then also neighborhood weed shops. Like, how would you each cover that? And I think you would all 3 do it differently.
Hellgate's been doing a great job, by the way, both of those.
For like the rat czar, I think one thing that we like kind of try to avoid is any bit of puff. So like, okay, this person's gonna really solve this thing now that we have a czar, but we have a really long memory. And like collectively, we've been covering New York City for like, each a decade, and we've seen rat czars come and go, and as we know, rats are still here. And like we've written, my co-owner Chris Robbins has written the like big New York Mag piece about like containerization in New York City, and the fact that like unless you're putting the trash in containers like they do everywhere else in the world, you're gonna have rats. So like our story is gonna we know that the Times is gonna do their like, in New York, a new rat czar is crowned, and that's going to be their headline, and like Daily News will be like, death to the rats, and ours is going to be like, who cares, because we're like, the rat czar only works if we actually can do something that is like going to be hard, and we don't think the Adams administration, like, they could surprise us totally, but we're going to be really skeptical. So that's how we're going to cover it, because we are a very hopeful publication, but like, we can be really cynical about stunts. So that was how we approached that. And then the weed shops, I mean, like, we vacillate because it's so fascinating and such fertile ground. Like, it is, pretty wild what's going on here. Nobody foresaw it 2 years ago that, this is how every neighborhood was gonna go. And so it could be one thing from us just like doing a taxonomy of like weed storefronts and being like the art that they have is really cool and who's making all these signs, down to like, writer-editor Katie Way wrote a great piece about like, actually this is helping New York avoid some of the pratfalls of corporate weed culture that you see in like Colorado or California. Like, it's still kind of cool to have weed in New York, but only because we're in this like weird interregnum.
So at Curbed, we've definitely exhaustively covered garbage and rats, and for us, the rat czar is really this opportunity. I mean, this particular appointment under Adams is really this opportunity to see, for us at least, if one of our kind of more voicey and stylish writers would actually be able to evaluate the streets with her and go along and see like a scene, like see her eye, what is she noticing, how is she interacting, how is she talking about it. So being skeptical, but also trying to be very personal, being very direct and visceral about what this person actually brings to the role, and do it in a way where you can see this person's personality and kind of bring them to life. So I think that would be at least our initial approach that we would take. And then I think the wheat bodegas we've also felt like are just such a great slice of business and street life and just like retail culture. And I think for us, what we've tried to do, which has been hard, is get people to open up their books and tell us what is the profit margin. And at the what we got in our first round was definitely, it's good enough for us to justify being open for 3 months, even if we get closed. It doesn't really, it's okay if, later on somebody closes us down because you're making such good money. But in any case, I think our next phase would definitely be, as the weed shop grows up, covering the new, very extremely fancy licensed ones and seeing how that gap emerges between the very like scrappy shop that has, I do think there's a single designer for them, and the shops that are now trying to cater to people who want the very high end experience with the gear and the candles and everything else. So it is a really rapidly changing landscape, and I think we definitely are not in the realm of like just chastising the shops for existing, and want to be able to observe as much as possible what specific owners are doing or what specific corners look like. Like, I think our most interesting approach would probably be like Housing Works dispensary versus like the 3 nearby, and just see how they're actually doing before and after. they open. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, so for the Rats Are, I think what I would probably want to do is actually invite her onto the podcast, and that way I could have the long sort of wide-ranging conversation that gets into like the various nooks and crannies of the issue, and same like where they're coming from, how they're thinking about it, I would do all I would read the Hellgate stories, and I would read the Curb stories, and then pull like the sort of the tougher questions and the tougher analyses and put them to them directly. That I think would probably be the only real meaningful way, or like going around to restaurateurs and doing sort of like a survey of like the ones that have the more notorious rat problems, and figure out, well, what are you doing as a specific, institution? What do you think of this Rats Are coming in, and sort of doing sort of more informal survey of different restaurant owners, or people on Nextdoor freaking out about various things and doing a roundup. I don't know. The weed shops, I think there were just 3 licenses granted in the latest round to Brooklyn businesses. So you would do a profile on each of them. Who are they? What's their background? We know the city's prioritizing formerly incarcerated people with weed charges, so we'd look into them, their backgrounds. Would be great to do. If I had a really good writer who is also a knowledgeable stoner, to just go and like sample everything and do reviews of like, this is the best shop, this is the best strain at this place, or something voicey and fun and witty, or because people are reticent to open their books, I love a confessional where you grant total anonymity to someone in exchange for candor, and then you get, confessions of a weed store owner, or confessions of a cop who goes to this weed store, because there's a weed store on my block, and I've been in there, cops in there buying stuff, and it's great. I think it's a fascinating moment to be in. So it all boils down to what resources I have, and I personally haven't been able to prioritize either of those stories, but with the right angle, we could do something that puts our own stamp on it.
As a topic for pitching, it's evergreen. Yeah. Ha ha ha. But no, because not only do you have like these unlicensed places and these licenses going out, you've got like the state being in charge of this huge marketplace, and New York State is very not great at like starting new things, and it's definitely taking time to get the motor running. But like, one thing that we did is we saw there was a great series of articles that were being written up in Syracuse about this obscure state agency that had actually been put in charge of all of the kind of directly impacted community stores, the grants, and they would build out these stores for people and stuff. And they were supposed to raise all this money, and this guy, great reporter Brad Racino, had done a series of stories about how the dorm authority of the state of New York, DASNY, had been put in charge of it to like nobody knew that this authority existed, and basically was doing business with Chris Webber, the former NBA star, and $50 million had gone missing. And like, so we just had him on the podcast. Like, that's a great way to cover it, is like just reach out like you were doing to journalists doing great work, because I feel like especially in this like very desiccated moment of media, everyone is just like, yeah, let's do it. Let's help each other out.
Yeah.
One quick thing I would also add, just because in terms of the specifics of Curbed and the way that we're very interested in real estate, is that there are a lot of fights about the weed bodegas, obviously, and I think what's very interesting is how now there are a lot of co-ops and buildings and luxury buildings that are trying to write rules about not hosting a bodega in their retail spaces. And so that's definitely like conflicts and fights that are very specific to like very upper class residents versus the weed bodega downstairs. That's the kind of story that we would really like love to see a detailed pitch on.
I mean, so I want to open up a little bit more to like pitching, but I think I'd love for you to describe what like a good piece for you is. Like what is a story that has all of the elements that you're looking for? Maybe if you have examples, that would be great. Anyone want to start?
I'll just start, but I think we can just round robin it. Okay. So I think for us, for sure, a great Curb story is one that is very curious about something that people have maybe ignored or like explained away, but you're kind of like always wondered like what is up with that. And so we call them curb mysteries. And so we have our writers pitch them. We love pitches about like what is up with X, and it could be tiny and trivial but extremely significant to like a community, or it could be like the thing that everyone passes through. And so we did have one editor who was like, why is all the floor of the Oculus cracked? Like, wasn't this thing just built recently? When I passed through Grand Central, it's not falling apart. Right. And so a writer looked it up and wrote this investigation where he got an engineer that was early on involved in the project to say, I told them to make the tiles wider or something, and the architect was like, it wouldn't look beautiful. And because it's heated from underground, everything is just cracking, and we're just going to replace it perennially for all of time. So it was a mystery that, everyone was like, oh yeah, Oculus falling apart, but it also was actually something that someone could report, investigate, and answer. Yeah.
When we had talked on the phone or on Zoom, I thought it was interesting that you were like, we don't write about what people hope they live like, some idealistic. It's like how people actually live in the city. And I was like, that's such a nice way of framing like how to think about your stories too, because they're very different things.
Yeah, I think we have like the same kind of guiding light as Curbed in many ways, but just the idea of like looking around the city and the what's up with that, or this thing is impacting my life. Am I not alone? Is this, do other people have to struggle with this? And like a great pitch that we got, which ran 2 weeks ago on the site, was who's seen the ads on the subway that make 0 sense and are telling you to like make like the most disgusting food imaginable. Yeah. Have you guys seen those? It's like, and they're really weird, and they're like aggressively so. And like they're like, okay, take this lasagna, now put chips on it, and you're like, why? And so, yeah, we had somebody pitch us been like, what's up with these videos? And it took them a month, and we were like, wow, it's going to take that long to like figure it out. But sure enough, like she got into it and found out like they're meant to disgust you, because you pay more attention to like things that are like viscerally unsettling, weirdly enough. So like not only are you stuck on your train like in the middle of a tunnel, you're watching things that have been designed to like unsettle you, so you keep paying attention when the ad plays. Like that's the whole thinking behind it. That's like a perfect pitch and a perfect story of like what's up with that, and then on top of that, it's even worse than you can imagine.
I say, well, all of our stories have to have some kind of Brooklyn angle. I mean, it's a filter that is useful and helps weed out a lot of stuff. It can be a stretch. It could be like razor thin, but it's got to have some sort of Brooklyn angle. And it's a lifestyle culture publication, so we're not doing the breaking news stuff. We're not doing murder and mayhem. We are, it's the lifestyle stuff. It's the things that everyone's noticed that's never said out loud. It is the what's up with that story. It is deep dive explainers. Like, there's been a series of hearings about what's going on in the Gowanus Canal area in terms of cleaning it up and developing it and rezoning it. So doing a nice long explainer on like what's the latest status there. I would love what's the latest status on the BQE with the cantilevered things that are going to collapse while we're driving on it if they don't do something about it. And there's no political will to fix that because it's such an entangled issue. I mean, you guys probably cover it a lot better than we're ever going to. But so those deeper dives of things that are, broad topics that you can break down as like an explainer. Like The Guardian has a great series called Past Notes, where they can take very serious topics and then do like a witty sort of Q&A that sort of breaks down a topic. I love stories about, community members who are doing something really. I like going to the neighborhoods that don't get all the, cool kid coverage, like the Williamsburgs and the Dumbos and the Bushwicks. We certainly cover those, but like real communities, real people in real communities, but also local celebrities who are not quite, huge, but are about to pop. Those are great. I mean, it really runs the gamut as long as there's some kind of a Brooklyn angle that tells a story that where our readers live and care about and has an impact on their life in some way, whether it's entertainment or food. The food stuff kills for us, does very well. And
Like restaurant openings?
restaurant openings, reviews. We share a freelancer who does very good stuff. And it's sort of also, when you see it kind of thing, because I do have to pick my battles.
And so, like, now that we have a good sense of what a good piece for you is, like, what are you looking for in an actual pitch? And then what are some common pitfalls that you see? Like you need a peg, but what are you looking for? How long do you like them to be?
Well, the pitches that bug me the most are like, we should do something on Ice Spice. I'm like, okay. Can you elaborate? Like, what's good? There needs to be, for us, there needs to be a Brooklyn angle. There needs to be a peg. There needs to be a reason. Why are we talking about this now? It needs to be fleshed out beyond just like, we should do something about X. Why is this the moment? It's the basic who, what, when, where, why. And if you can answer those questions and it's relevant, it's germane now, and it's not an email that's 1,000 words long, I will get to it and be familiar with the publication. Be familiar with what we cover. Don't pitch me stuff we've already written because it shows me you're not really paying attention. That happens a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's something we talk about here a lot, and I'm like, it actually happens a lot to editors that the people don't even read your publication first. It's a low bar, but it's a good one to do. And
then it becomes a conversation. If I've never worked with you before, I want to talk to you before we actually get going on a story. But the pitch has to have, some local relevance, something that matters to the people who live in the community, and that is not something that's been done to death, is something that is just below the surface, about to pop out, and it's a tricky line to walk.
I think for me, we get definitely a range of pitches, but the ones that I kind of feel like an immediate yes to is usually when someone can really show that they're obsessed about something and they've done the work and it's like all there. You're like, oh, they really know this. I had no idea about this and I want to know more and I believe they can do it. So if they show like they know this stuff, but they also have a very like unique, obsessive approach to it, it's usually like right away I have faith. And then, that's what you usually want to see. I think when the pitch is very like, this is important. Like, we get a lot of those, like, this is a very important thing that we should cover. But then I don't see that they've done the, like, digging to find out how this will, like, actually be for readers to read. Then I don't feel very confident about saying yes right away. Then I might do the conversation that's like, tell me more. How do you know this person? Or how did you find out about the situation? And, like, what do you ultimately see the piece being? So.
Can I add to that? Sorry, but about the passion thing, I totally agree with that. Like, I get a lot of pitches that read like book reports, and I know that the story is going to read like a book report, and it's not fun to write. It's not fun to read. The other thing, though, the caveat to that is I get a lot of pitches by people who are passionate about a thing, a band, or whatever, and it turns out they're like best friends. Like, don't pitch me your friends. Don't pitch me your roommate. Or they send me something that's just like a gushing fanboy thing, and like that's not going to work either. But passion is good, informed passion.
Yeah, I really don't want to like stress too much pre-reporting because it being unpaid labor, but it is really helpful instead of saying I plan on reaching out to, I'm going to look into like doing a little bit of that, of like, oh, if I'm going to talk to this council member, I've already reached out to their office and like talked about doing an interview for a publication if you're an established journalist. So somewhere in between, not in my mind longer than 3 paragraphs, and really having like, what's the deliverable, who you're talking to, what this is about. I mean, it doesn't hurt to even let some of the voice creep in of like, what is this going to sound like? Show me that you can write. If it's a book report, I'm just going to think that you can't, or it's going to take a lot of work. And I know a lot of you guys are going to be transitioning from being like having written long stories for your final project and having it already done, and maybe it is good enough to get it published somewhere. I would maybe not just send that straight out to the publication. I would describe your piece, because it's possible that the editors would be interested, but maybe want to talk to you and go a totally different direction. And that's so much tougher when they're already looking at, the like 1,200 word story. So be really open to kind of, I know I'm transitioning here, but be open to be like molded by the editor. And the way to get them interested in doing that is by having a really like solid pitch that has like your deliverables, 800 words, these sources, by this date, and like hitting them. But when people put that in a pitch, I'm like, yes, this is somebody who is doing this for work and like is not going to be like, oh, I got busy, sorry, it's like it's not coming in this week.
Well, I mean, the yeses are easy and the nos are easy, but it's the maybes that sit in that tab forever. And so some of you had said that you'd reach back out to the writer and ask them some questions, but I'm just curious, like, how often are you doing that? Because then that sort of is a signal that, okay, now I'm gonna, like, you're sort of making these calculations when you're getting a freelance piece in, that you're like, okay, can they pull it off? How much time is it gonna take me? And the very act of being like reaching out and saying, hey, let's talk about this a little more, is adding time. So, and I mean, I think in an ideal world, it would be lovely to always hear from the editor and like talk to them. So I'm just curious, how much are you doing that? Like, let's talk, the pitch wasn't exactly it, but let's talk through another angle or something.
It's pretty rare.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes somebody will have a really good pitch about something that I want the publication to write about, but like it's kind of clear they're not coming at it from the right way. So that conversation could be kind of like, let me plant these ideas in your head, because I also want to be really mindful if they've brought something really novel and I'm like, oh, we should totally report on this. Like, well, we can't just take your story. So we want to work with you. And that's the situation where we will have like a 45-minute conversation with somebody and be like, okay, so we're like super on the same page here. Like, we know what the story is going to be, because it's such a strong idea, and maybe the pitch wasn't there or the angle wasn't there. That's where it's really worth it. If we're already like teetering on the edge, it's so much easier to say no, as opposed to diving into a really long conversation that like best case scenario, you're going to get a piece that you kind of weren't super hot on to begin with. So as long as the kernel is there and it's like captivating, it's worth that investment. But if you're already on the fence, like, and in these editorial meetings, we could have like a 20-minute conversation and then like at the end of it be like, so does anybody like this pitch? And everyone's like, no. Well, like, why did we spend 20 minutes talking about it, So you want to give people the benefit of the doubt and like treat their ideas with respect, but sometimes that means just saying no.
So one thing I wanted to ask too is, where am I, sorry, is we've talked about this a little bit, but how much are you reaching out to writers versus taking pitched pieces? So, I mean, Brian, you had said that you have you have this topic and you have a writer who always writes about it, and so you just reach out to them.
I wish I had more of that, but I wish I had a staff that I could bounce the ideas off of. That's a luxury. Sorry, what was the question? It was
just how much are you taking? You're all freelance, I guess.
right.
So,
how much
are you
am I
reaching
out to new writers or reaching out to writers?
How much are
already
you
in this?
taking pitches versus reaching out to writers to hey, there's this thing, do you have an idea?
I'm not really ever reaching out to writers that I haven't worked with yet, unless I really sort of keep seeing their byline and admire them or whatever. Most of the pitches come from freelancers, usually people that I've worked with before. There are a lot of I do get a lot of cold pitches, and those obviously turn into a whole series of exchanges and emails and conversations before anything gets off the ground. So it's obviously easier to work with people that I've worked with in the past, especially if something has a relatively tight window or a quick turnaround. It is a mix. And then I have a guy who, if you ever, I have a couple people who don't use their byline because they work somewhere else and they're not really allowed to freelance, but they're really good and quick and they can turn stuff around and I can pay them and they don't have to get fired. So those are my oh, this thing happened. We're not really going to add anything to it, but we can aggregate it in a voicey way and have it pop and be because I need one more thing for the goddamn newsletter. I'll call him and just can you pop something out, and he usually does, or I'll do it myself. It's daily. I mean, I'm talking to freelancers daily.
I'm definitely interested in talking to people. I think I reach out to new writers at least once or twice a week. I also ask other editors for names. I also asking other writers for other writers' names sometimes, because a lot of people do wear two hats. They've been editors in the past. And we do so at Curb, we definitely have this kind of consideration and balance where we have a team of writers. And so we really, when we look for freelancers, are looking for people that have something different from what our staff already brings to the table. And that's usually like a neighborhood specialization, like a topic that they've really shown that they can write about, or a kind of built area of the city that they've been, writing about in the past. So, but I do really believe that, Curb has a lot of room to incorporate a lot more voices. So I generally, if I could, I would talk to new writers every single day. Like I would be having coffee 3 times a day, but I can't. So I am open and definitely happy to meet with people.
Yeah, I mean, coming up as a journalist in New York, the number one lesson I got was when I started pitching places or freelancing for places like Gothamist. It was hitting all these small bore stories that in my mind I wanted to do these big investigations, but it was go cover this talk at the 92nd Street Y tonight and take photos and 600 words, and treating that it's Watergate, just really getting it in on time and filing clean, and that is so important. And that's really what I think of when we're going to our bullpen of writers, is who's actually gonna turn this around, who always picks up, who's going to have this filed at 7 a.m. because they care and they make it work. And a lot of times people get those skills stringing for places like the Daily News or one of the other publications that mostly used to exist. So yeah, being a freelancer that really can be reliable definitely puts you on the speed dial for when something comes across and you're okay, well, this is a story, we're all tied up, or we don't have anyone to go cover this. Who do we call up? Who's the first person in mind? That maybe we're not even thinking of do they know anything about this, but rather can they file, can they be clean, can they be quick, do they ask the right questions?
I'm just gonna ask 2 more questions and then we're gonna open it up to the students. So there's a microphone here. So whenever you can line up pretty soon. A lot of students never hear back from editors. And I know, and I have empathy for this as a student, but also as an editor with an insane inbox. I also understand. So does silence mean no? And does, how can students avoid that silence? When should they follow up?
Silence for me either means I just never saw it because it got pushed down, 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 down. Or it's a no, but I didn't have the energy to reply. Or it's maybe, but I didn't have the energy to untangle as to why it's a maybe and really unpack my feelings about it. And I'm just I read it and I was ugh. And then I have other emails that I have to get to, and I'll get back to that. Or sometimes it's a yes that I just haven't seen yet. I don't know. It's not a satisfying answer, but I've been on both sides of that fence. I've been a freelancer. I remember once I pitched a music trend piece to the New York Times, very specific, and I had been in touch with the editors before, and no reply, no reply, no reply. And then a month later, I saw the exact story in the Sunday Times that I had pitched.
Weird. The New York Times did that to you?
Yeah,
the New York Times. Man, they still
Isn't
weird,
that
crazy.
And I wrote the editor, I probably burned a bridge, but I'm what the fuck? And I forwarded my email to them. And so I won't do that to you, I promise. But if I don't get back, it means it's not a no, but I'm not stoked. Or I just didn't see it.
That's where the students are so should I write back or not? And should I write back Thursday or Friday? And
don't do it the next. Well, don't do it the next day.
Don't do it the next day, and then slide into my DMs as well.
Slide in the DMs.
Be 3 to 4 days, I think is cool. If it's timely, be hey, this is coming up. It could really be as simple as in our pitch guide, you didn't follow the guide, which includes the really important putting pitch in your subject line, because inbox 1 million, we're literally just search term pitch and then going through it one by one. I wish we had a better system, but like that's it.
I actually don't like it because when I see pitch in the subject line, I think it's from a flack, and I
I
don't
know.
read publicist
Yeah.
emails. Like I see pitch, it's usually that, but not always. If you know me from someone else, use their name in the subject line. Like Whitney Dangerfield sent me, like that might help. But yeah, I guess pitch works too. But
Yeah, as long as pitch and then like after the apostrophe, it's not like L'Oreal presents, you know, like then, you know.
I also have to assure everyone silence is definitely not a no, but it definitely is not like a, this caught my eye, I'm going to say yes. It usually means like I need to do a little work to like digest it, understand it, feel confident about the person, and then it gets deferred. So I do like follow-up emails. Then I can reconsider, and if I get a follow-up, I usually then try to give a definitive yes or no, because then it's the person has taken the time.
Yeah.
So I do, with the follow-up, I feel like I should. So
Like a follow-up a week later.
yeah, like a week later. I do think if it's timely, it has to be so clear in the first pitch email, like, I'm writing because this is going to open in like 2 days and I need to know. So I do really appreciate when people are like, I would like to know in 3 days because this thing is opening, and just mention the peg. But it is definitely like the inbox is full of pitch. Yeah, like new house in, you know, the Hamptons, and you're like, this is not a pitch.
Yeah.
Only for us, do the pitch trick.
I know. Well, it's hard because I mean that's what I suggest to students is write pitch : but you're right. Like that is what all of the ad people are doing too. So you know, getting the pitch accepted or considered is the first step of like many other steps after that. So can you talk about what a good working relationship means to you? The idea, you know, is to pitch, write something, and then write something else, and else, and else. Like you're building a relationship. It's not just one-off piece. So what does a good working relationship mean to you? And then we're opening up to students, so you should line up. Please.
Accept your edits.
Yes.
Like,
Don't be a
oh
jerk.
my God. Don't be precious. Assume that the editor knows the style of the publication, knows your story, has read your story, has even done their own research into the story, so they know what's maybe important and not important. There are so many freelancers out there who reject changes in Google Docs, and like you will no longer work with that publication once you start doing that. And you've really got to graduate to like an extremely high level of, you know, excellence in the field of journalism to like reject the change, because this person knows the publication better than you. You are working for them. You know, I hate to be hierarchical. I'm in a worker co-op, but like newsroom hierarchy exists. The editor is the one like calling the shots here. And if you really have a problem with it, yeah, offer to talk it out, but like, man, do not hit the red X. It is brutal, and you'll stop working for them.
I mean, obviously, if the editor added a inaccuracy, say
That's
that.
when you do a phone call, but like,
or
yeah.
and explain why you hit the red X.
Exactly.
For me, I think I actually really appreciate over communicators. So, you know, I've asked writers for an outline or a memo, and then I'll get like a 5,000 word draft instead, and I'll be like, I wanted to know how the reporting was going. So I really love the writers who are like, you know, they're working on something that'll take them a month, and they're like, this is what I found this week. What do you think? That to me is like the sign of, okay, we're gonna get to the same page together. And so I really appreciate when people are like, I got to talk to these people, should I now reach out to them? So I do like being part of the reporting and drafting process much more, and not get something at the very end that we've never discussed, or, you know, it's not pitch and then draft to me. It's really like pitch and then here's an update, and here's an email, here's what I'm thinking for structure. I have a problem. This person never called me back. Like, I really just want to be over-communicated to.
I don't want to be over-communicated to. We'll work on a pitch. We'll agree on the parameters of a story. We'll agree on the format, the length, the deadline. And then if you hit a roadblock, yes, reach out to me. Like, I can't get in touch with this, or I was reporting it, and in fact, this isn't the story, that's the story. Because I don't like it when I'm expecting one thing and something entirely different shows up. So it's that form of communication is great. I do have a couple freelancers who have my cell phone number and they'll text me at 11 o'clock at night being like, I'm filing in the morning. And I'm like, well, don't text me that. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't push back. Be reasonable. Be on time. Read your story before you file it. Make sure it's in English, and that the verb matches the subject and all of that. Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, my name is Noah Augustine, and a while ago I wrote a really nicely written and nicely reported piece about the concerning amount of homeless people in the New York Public Library that I visit very often. I sent it to my editor, and when I first sent it to him, he seemed really happy with it. He said it was a nice piece, and I agreed. And a couple of weeks later, he said that due to the paper's mostly liberal audience, the piece wouldn't be able to be published because it could offend some of the readers or anger some of the readers or upset some of the readers. And my question is, if you have a piece that I would say straddles the line between liberalism and conservatism, which I didn't really feel that my piece did, but I can understand why the editor would see it that way. What do you suggest a writer would do with that piece in order to avoid losing the chance of publishing a nice piece? Thank you.
Very specific. Yeah.
You should do radio. It's a good voice. I don't know what the question is. Where do you straddle the line between a point of view or some sort of political agenda? And
I mean, there wasn't really anything political about the piece. It was just talking about that I find it was more of an opinion piece, but that I found it extremely concerning the amount of homeless people that are in the New York Public Library. I didn't say anything against homeless people, and I actually said that I appreciated the fact that a public library allows everybody into the library because it's public, but that there being that many homeless people in the first place is a problem in itself. But anyway, my question is, when you have a piece like that, not even necessarily if it's conservative or liberal, but something that you know might go against the status quo, what do you do with that?
if it's accurate and correct and factually buttoned up, then it's a good story, and it's current and it breaks news. We don't do a ton of opinion, and when we do, it is factually backed up. It's a point of view with reporting. But I'm not politically agnostic. We do have a point of view in general at Brooklyn Magazine, but it's got to be supported by fact.
I think similarly, it is important to, I think, always be able to rigorously interrogate different political positions. But at Curb, we also don't publish a lot of opinion. And I think it would have to be this a question about, for example, besides pointing to root causes of why there is a homelessness problem, I think the question would have to be, what are you trying to have readers take away from the piece? And is it a sense of discomfort, or is it really about resources, or is it about the meaning of public space and how it can really be for the full public? But I think that we would really have to kind of make sure that the piece could be read by a wide number of readers and not feel like it's like a diatribe or like one person's opinion, that
Right.
it had rigor and like a sense of inquiry, and it wasn't, for example, just like taking a position just to argue it.
Yeah, I would say even in that, to use that example, if you're talking about the number of homeless people in the New York Public Library and you have an opinion about it or you're raising an issue, the way into that is just spend a day with one of them, and then you do a profile of what's it like to live in the New York Public Library, and like, who are you interacting with? Who are the other homeless people that you're interacting with? Do you avoid them? Just let the story be that person and their story, and let the reader come to their own conclusions. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. You're a good editor.
Cornelia.
Hi. I don't know how sensitive this microphone is. Last time they were crazy sensitive. No, this is okay. Hello. My name is Cornelia. I'm in a magazine program. I would like to ask, so we've talked about, obviously I'm aware that I shouldn't send my entire piece, my 3,000-word capstone paper to an editor and be like, you want to publish this? But I do want to ask, I have heard through the grapevine that sometimes like being in journalism school kind of almost like harms you because you are a student and you're not a journalist. So, for example, I've gone so far as to create a separate email address, which is not my NYU address, where it's like I'm a person, not a student. And I have like 6 years of experience in Europe, but that also doesn't really help because everything is in German. So I've been trying to make my mark in the United States of America, but I am a journalism student, and yeah, so I would like to ask, how do you kind of bridge the gap between, yes, I'm a journalism school and technically I'm writing all of this stuff for school, but actually those are great stories, if I may be so confident to say that. And how do you, obviously if you cold email someone, they only see your email and your email signature, so how do you make yourself look great?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea not to have the .edu, because sometimes, especially like in May, we will, the tips email or the pitch email, we can definitely see that a professor sent it to all their students and told them like as an assignment or like just send them all in, and now we've got to read them all, and you know there's 20 of them. So like yeah, sometimes it's better just to have the professional at your own website or at Gmail. That's really helpful. And then in terms of like yeah, we have published capstone projects on the website. Not as they are currently written. We will give them edits. We will work with them, which is why it is so helpful from our perspective, you know, have the actual pitch. This is the story. You've already reported it out. Would you like to see a draft? And then taking it from there. Because a lot of times, you know, the draft, just like landing in our inbox, will throw us off, and we'll have like no conception of it outside of that. So I would really like focus on having a really strong pitch, even and being okay. Like the response might be like, great pitch, great reporting, we're gonna totally redo this story. Like, don't be precious about like, but it's my capstone. Like, you know what? And that you graduated and that rules and you got a good grade, but like that's, you're gonna get paid for this, which is rad. And like, you know, but like you gotta redo it. You gotta put in more work. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I definitely think that I've never received a full draft and said, this is it. It's usually, okay, we're going to have to do this kind of all over again, I think, when it comes to putting it on the site. I don't necessarily think when I see a .edu I feel any sort of way, but I just, again, as Max is saying, if the pitch is strong and I feel like the person is very confident in their voice and their writing and their style, then I'm okay with, you know, greenlighting a pitch, and definitely I've worked with NYU students before.
Yeah. Same, all the above.
Yeah, it's about the idea.
Yeah, don't send like a 3,000-word draft of something that I wasn't expecting and expect me to read it. Send a pitch with what they were saying. Why am I pitching this? What is it? And be prepared to have to, you know, go back and do more reporting on it.
Thank you.
But I don't care if your email says edu on it.
Just don't all send it at once.
Don't all send it at once.
Hi there, my name is Laura Jadid. I write about American conservative and far-right movements. And my question to you is, the pitch thing I've used for like 3 years now with my pitches, and I would like to know what subjects do work for you, if not the pitch, because that's what I've always used, and I would like to increase my response rate.
No, pitch works for me, but I think I think it just has to be like very concise, like, so, you know, for example, pitch on something, 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 so I read it as a sentence, whereas I think a lot of PR firms are now sending pitch, all in, you know, it's a very minor thing, but you know, you can tell when you read the subject line that it's about a product or about a house somewhere that's, you know, extremely expensive. So I think as long as you can be really specific in your headline, somewhat personal, you know, a pitch about something, a pitch on something, that makes me more inclined to know it's not coming from a bot.
That makes sense.
And I think a lot of editors are fine with pitch, but yeah, making sure that that next part isn't like on lipstick or something, you know?
Right.
L'Oreal presents.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we keep referring to this, but I just want to make sure everyone knows, like, the second that you are an editor or have a publishing website, you get added by like Sishin or any of these PR companies that basically get put on all these lists that have very little to do with what you actually cover, and it's just PR people constantly in your inbox, and you are constantly fighting them and like marking as spam and marking as spam, and each time the pitch will just be like so uninteresting or like like who cares, unless it's like free rooftop bar opening, and you're like, well, this needs coverage, man, you know? Yeah, don't be afraid of the trap. It's like, it's cool. That's one of the perks. You don't even have to cover the thing. But you know, the not trying to be like, I don't want to say scammy, but even like gimmicky in your subject line. Just like tell it how it is, and like, you know, unfortunately, you are competing with a lot of people who are like literally, they have, you know, scores that comes up with for their subject lines that they feed it into algorithms, and it comes up with like 95% score. These are all made up, but like companies buy this stuff. So yeah, sorry that it is a lot of just like throwing it into the void, but like that's just kind of what it is.
Cool.
It is a fire hose of noise, the inbox. So I guess pitch is fine, but make it tight. Drop a name if you can.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
I mean, sometimes, so I do this pitch collective where students come and we talk through pitches, and sometimes we'll spend 15 minutes on the subject line of the email. And so like that is, I'm not saying do that every time, but like you should think about your subject line, put some thought into it. So it's not just like pitch on rats or something. Like, you know, you want to say something a little bit more.
Hi there. Thank you so much for all the great insight that you've shared so far. My name's Emily. I'm a full-time freelancer, and I've been a staff editor in past lives, so I really appreciate all of the invisible labor that goes into being a great editor like yourselves. My question is, do you have any tips for formulating a pitch as a freelancer that is timely enough to feel like interesting and have like a compelling peg, but not so timely that it, you know, gets lost in the shuffle of your day-to-day, but also won't get lost in the evergreen purgatory, as you described? And I also would love to hear if you can share what your rates are for freelance pitches.
I would say, I guess one thing that would make pitches stand out for me definitely is if there's a really great headline that accompanies it, then I can actually like see the piece like coming to life, and I'm like, this has a real point of view and perspective, and I can see how this would be appealing to people. That's one thing that comes to mind. And then we do have kind of a range of rates, so it depends on the level of reporting and the level of experience, but it starts at 300 and then it just kind of goes to, I would say it starts at 300 to 500 and then goes to, there's no cap. But I would say that generally for something over, like let's say it's reported over 1,000 words, it required a few sources, and it would be anywhere between 600 to 800. But then if it's like groundbreaking, you know, you're digging into legal records, there's a lot of fact checking you have to do and so on, then the rate goes up. So there's kind of a baseline and then it goes up.
One way to keep it out of purgatory is like to pick kind of a mid-range deadline that you could peg something to. So we ran a piece last week that a freelancer had actually been working on, or like kind of thinking about for a while, which is about why doesn't New York City create a public bank to store its money if it has all these problems with who it stores money with, because, you know, they invest in fossil fuel infrastructure and things like that. And, they pitched it like 2 months ago, and then, they'd been working on it, and then 2 weeks ago they got in touch and were like, well, there's a city council hearing about the bill I'm talking about. Okay, well now we have like kind of this intermediate, it's like, we can put the time that we want to work on it in, and like that's important. Or there's going to be like a big protest involving this. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be like, I'm going to go out tomorrow and cover X. You could look far down the line and just give it some sort of news peg to like why we're bringing it to you today that doesn't keep it, again, from going into like deep purgatory. Yeah. Rate-wise, like 800, we worked out an agreement with the National Writers Union on our rates. We're fully transparent, so like blog post or like 2-source story, it's around 350. Slightly longer feature, we get to like 500. And then if it's like a 3,000 worder, it's like really well researched, we go to like 50 cents a word when we can afford it.
Yeah. I'll say the same thing. Like if you're working on a story and it's sort of a topic, but there's something that happens in the news that makes it relevant, like you just try to give as much runway ahead of that date as possible and just say this is why this works now and why it would make sense to run it on this date or around this date because this hearing or this anniversary or this whatever. And then be patient and then follow up if you don't hear. Our rates are for a piece that has more than one source, 300. We do some sort of newsy aggregation stuff that doesn't require a lot of original reporting. That can be 1 to 200, and then we have a print publication that comes out. It's now twice a year. We try to get as close to $1 a word as we can afford, and then if you're and then likewise, it does depend on your level of experience. If you're someone who's very good, very fast, who's worked with us, has a track record, that creeps up.
Hi, my name is Mark McNulty. Thank you all for being here and speaking with us. Max and Sukjong, back in December, I sent you a pitch about dancing and a citywide zoning text amendment around legalizing dancing for the mayor's City of Yes initiative. And I got one of those kind of follow-up emails where you asked, we're interested, and that was so encouraging, and thank you for doing that. I'm no longer a student. I'm just kind of getting started in freelancing after doing music journalism or music blogging for several years. But I just wanted to say thanks, and in case I didn't get to speak to you after this, I wanted to give you my card so that when I pitch you the next time, you remember me, because you did follow up, but I think my follow-ups to your emails weren't timely or on point. But thanks for taking the time and for speaking to everyone today.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Advika. I'm a student majoring in journalism and politics. I have just started writing, and I wanted to know if you look for pieces that have a story angle, because there are pieces that are more informative, they're just reads, but then there are pieces that act like resources that have an investigative journalism aspect to it. Also, to Ms. Hong, when we were talking about follow-ups, you talked about time-sensitive follow-ups. I feel that it's very subjective because what I might feel is a time-sensitive topic, the editor might not. So do you have any examples of those time-sensitive stories?
I guess, so your first question was about, sorry.
Do we need a story angle to a pitch?
Okay. I think generally at Curd we do like commentary and point of view, so I think a story angle is important, but at the same time, I think if it's a story that you're breaking, that only you have, and that it should be known, then a straight news story is also appreciated. So it really depends on, if it's something that everyone has covered, then an angle is really important. And if it's something that only you know that no one has covered, then I'm like, well, let's just get it out there. So that's, I guess, my short answer. And then on the question of timeliness, I think that is really let's see, let me think of an example. I think, people, they do pitch to anniversaries, for example, like a 1-year anniversary of something, a 2-year anniversary of something, and I think that's important, as well as Max was mentioning, there might be a hearing coming up where something will be decided. I think to edit freelancers, I usually like at least a 1 week to 2 week lead time, because if it's tomorrow, I don't know if, we're gonna get the art, we're gonna be able to edit, fact check, copy edit in time. And so, yeah, just indicating like this is really timely because this is gonna happen in a week, then I need to like move on this. So that's just one example.
I think sometimes students feel like something's timely because they finished, like it's a project they've been working on and it feels very timely to them. And I understand that inclination, but you need to sort of think about it from the editor's point of view.
And the readers.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, we're all like day 2 publications. We're like rarely, if ever, gonna like go into breaking news mode. We'll break news, like investigations, but think of like what's the day 2 story, and if you're missing that, like what's the day 8 story? If there's going to be a delay, you really have to justify the time that happened between the news and what you're doing, and like why people still care.
Yeah, you have to find your point of differentiation, and that becomes your angle, whether it's your voice, your take, or a wrinkle that no one else has reported on or thought about.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm an NYU student and a freelancer, and I write mainly on religion. And my question is sparked by someone's comment that like the Twitter DMs can be annoying. So I feel like my success getting anything published, I'm trying to think of like all the stories. It's usually directly tied to like having a relationship with an editor, which usually started at like an in-person meeting, or basically showing up to an event where they are and like forcing my way into their world. And literally, like the same tactic that you use on like getting sources, showing up to their thing and being like, I'm here and you can't ignore me. So yeah, that's a little aggressive. And I wonder like, when is it ever appropriate to DM someone on Twitter if they even have their DMs open, as an attempt to not be ignored, or just maybe, a follow-up when you have followed up on email and it's not answered, because that does happen, when to know, like, when the silence really is a no versus, like, maybe if I just keep trying, or, maybe if I have a relationship with them, the next pitch will be more successful, and trying to break down the elite world of journalism club.
Yeah, I'm never gonna say don't shoot your shot. Just know like it goes both ways. So like and yeah, we know we're dealing with as editors, we're dealing with journalists. Like you guys are all very good at just going out and knocking on doors or finding us and knowing where we're gonna be, which is great. And I can't recommend enough like going to events that are like this. And like that's the beauty of being in New York City is like you don't have to really go far to find that editor or that writer or that person you want to speak to. That's totally valid way to get in front of them. And, like you were saying in terms of like referred by in the subject line, nothing better than like, we spoke last night and you're like, oh, yes, okay, that person I talked to, okay, put yourself out there.
As for DMs, mine are open, and I guess everyone is different. Don't DM me on Instagram. DM me on Twitter. That's fine. Don't relentlessly DM me on Twitter. If we're already emailing, don't follow up on DM. Keep it in one lane. And once we've established that email contact, don't go back to DM. And to go to the in-person events, shoot your shot, but also like there's time is finite.
I do love a Twitter DM to reach out to a writer, but I do not love a writer I'm emailing and talking with DMing me on Twitter, because then I'm like, we're already talking, or you've already sent your pitch, and at that point, I do like, but I do really love like seeing people's ideas on the timeline and being like, oh, tell me more, or give me your, I usually just ask for an email address at that point.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Danielle Renwick. I'm a climate journalist and an editor. And sort of two questions. I love the framing of your question about what's a Hellgate or what's a curbed story to the rat czar. Like, could you talk about that, and what's a curbed story on climate? What's and then if there's time for like a second part, one issue I have as an editor is I sometimes get mired in stories with writers, and then I come away from it feeling terrible because I'm paying them not a huge amount, and I'm salaried, so I don't feel so bad using so much of my time on it. But like, how do you avoid getting mired in stories? If there's time for that second one.
In terms of like climate coverage, great question. I wrote 2 stories last week about climate, and I came at it from a total. The reason why I thought it was a good Hellgate story was I came at it from like totally not really being super in depth on climate issues and just being like, okay, if I was explaining this to a New Yorker who cared about the climate, who was excited about what was going to happen in the state over the next 20 years, but again was like cynical enough not to like just be reading a press release from the governor or from advocacy groups that are championing something, or a developer that like says like wind turbines are going to save the planet. Like, what would it look like to just like have a real kind of like not super overly hopeful take on what's going to happen in the city, and like have it be easily digestible, because I didn't see that out there. I wanted to like see what was going to happen to our electrical grid over the next 20 years, and nobody had like written that timeline, so I gave it a shot. So I felt like that was a good Hellgate story, because we are trying to reach New Yorkers that really care about New York City and want it to be better, but are not unrealistic and like don't buy the spin. And then to your second question, which was... How do you not become mired in this? Yeah, I mean, right, you don't want to monopolize people's time. You want to respect it. Sometimes you cut bait. Sometimes it's not working, and we have a kill fee policy, and, that's it. Don't be afraid to just be like, it's not working out. It's not going anywhere.
I think at Curbed, we're definitely interested in climate stories, but we definitely have really ask our writers to kind of approach it with very like narrow, specific, kind of visceral, like concrete story angles. So we've done, for example, stories on like shade in playgrounds, and stories on why EVs are not going to be the answer to our climate crisis, or we're going to do more on heat, the heat island effect and so on in New York City. But I think as much as possible, for us, a Curb story has to involve the built environment in some way. And I think, as I mentioned to Whitney, we don't necessarily want to write about the latest like white paper, or here's the latest pie in the sky recommendation. Like, as much as possible, Curb climate coverage has to be, here's something that actually is being tried and is working or is failing, or here is something that feels, I'm trying to think of another one. People are moving away from cars and going to using golf carts in certain communities. So like, let's actually look at what people are doing to address, the emissions questions, but not have it be, we need to stop shopping, period. Just none of that kind of didactic stuff.
Or like Cleo's story, where she's following what happens to your compost when you put it in one of those smart bins. And like from the beginning to end, that is such like a good Curbed story of just like great access, nuts and bolts, this is what happens. A great like answer the question that's on every New Yorker's mind, which is, where does this thing go?
Yeah, and similarly, Brooklyn is it's a big city in its own right. It's the 3rd largest city in the country. So there are a lot of environmental nooks and crannies everywhere, from Gowanus to, oil drilling and fracking. So, but it has to be not just like Gowanus. It has to be like a specific what element of it, like the recent. Was it a Curb story about the shuffleboard club that was over?
Gothamist.
Was that Gothamist? Yeah. It was Gothamist. It was the shuffleboard club that's sitting over a Superfund site that's been leaking emissions into the building for 10 years, where people have been working for 10 years, and so they actually be in the room. So we're going to do like a day 2 or 3 or 14 story on that. But where it affects people's lives and where they should be curious, concerned, hopeful. There's pipeline stuff going on, and there are two different approaches in different neighborhoods in Brooklyn to the same pipeline. So things like that. And I echo your sentiment on cutting. You got to jump ship at a certain point. You're like, this is killing me. It's killing you, and I'm gonna kill it.
I've had stories killed. We've all had stories killed.
Stories
It's
killed,
just part of the game.
All right, last question.
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm in the Global Journalism program. My question is about when you have somewhat niche topics. So I was wondering, when you've read the publication and you've seen that they've covered a niche topic. So I'll give an example as roller skating. I know that Curb wrote about Disco Oasis, which happened in Central Park this past summer, and I know that Brooklyn Mag has written about Brooklyn Skates, for example, closing down in September. I'm working on a story right now about this older roller skater who is legally blind, who's had his both hips replaced. He actually skated in Disco Oasis, and it's a story I'm very excited about. I'm not sure when I look at stories that have been written, because roller skating is such a specific hobby, whether seeing this niche hobby being written about, is that a good sign for freelancers to, okay, maybe they want to follow up on this, or is it a bad sign that they've already covered it and they won't be interested? So in general, niche topics, basically.
I mean, it has to be a different enough story. There's nothing more annoying than getting a pitch the day after you write a story, just saying I saw your story on plastic cups. Here's my story on plastic cups. We just did that. But the flip side to that is I love niche is great if you can differentiate, and anything that makes people go that's weird, I want to know more about that guy. We're doing a story on we just did a story on a curling club in Brooklyn. That's one of the only curling clubs in the city, I think, and they're looking for their own. They don't have a building that's adequate enough to practice curling. So it's this curling club's mission to find their home. And that's quirky, it's cute, it's niche, and we didn't do the same story 3 days ago. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for us as well, I think that we would also evaluate the pitch in terms of whether that niche is very precious and very isolated, or whether even if I have never roller skated in my life, I would actually find something in it for me. And so that would really be important to us, because I think, there's a billion hobbyists in the city, and there's a way to write about something where it's so cute and awesome and isn't that nice. But I think for it to be a Curbed or magazine story, it just has to feel there's this slightly bigger thing, something that someone learned, but it should also not be a personal essay. So it's a little bit like a balancing act.
Yeah, so they've already run their roller skating story, so please pitch it to Hellgate. And honestly, for niche, you're developing, you're creating an audience for it, right? So these things aren't counting against it. It's not there's a certain amount. Man, how many pickleball stories have there been, right? But it's everywhere. The roller skate rink in Central Park this year is going to be pickleball. It's already pickleball. As long as the character is compelling and there is something novel in there, then there will always be a place for it. And because ultimately it's a story about a person, right? So roller skating is just the genre it plays in. So I would definitely not feel like you're being crowded out by too much coverage of it. If it's a pitch about cronuts or something that's been done too much, then okay, maybe, unless you have something really interesting about it. But I wouldn't feel bad if you're oh, somebody's already written the roller skating story. These, readers are evergreen. They'll click again and again. So as long as you're doing something novel, it's totally worth it. So please pitch.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful. Thank you.